Hi, welcome to this new tutorial. In this tutorial we'll be looking at Headus UVLayout. We'll be UVing various objects from this room, and I've specifically picked the objects so I can show you a number of different techniques. Now when you open UVLayout you'll see this. So the interface isn't exactly what you call pretty, but it is a very fast and very efficient program, and that's generally what we care about. Now to load in an object, it's pretty simple. Just click the load button, and if you press this dir button you'll be able to browse to your scene and select the OBJ you want. And that's the other thing, Headus basically works with OBJs, so any piece of 3D software you might be using, as long as you can export and import an OBJ, this program will work absolutely fine for you. Now if we look, before we load, let's look at the load options. Now we're going to be working with polygon models and we want a new UV. If you want to edit an existing UV, flick this over to edit, and there's a few other options, most of which we won't touch upon. One thing I will note though is if you load a model into UVLayout and it comes up with an error that the model is somehow defective, maybe it has manifold geometry, then you can use this clean function here to load it in anyway. I wouldn't if I were you. It's better to go back to your 3D program of choice and fix the error before you load it into UVLayout. It'll just save you a lot of problems down the way. Okay, so if we loaded our first object, which we're going to do this wall panel. If you look here, we've got various panels on the wall, so I'm going to start simple and we're going to get progressively more complicated. I'll just load. Okay, and this is our main display. This has come in backwards, and we can see here our wall panel. Now the keys for navigating the display are the same as they are in Maya, which if you're not a Maya user, it's just Alt left button to rotate around the object, or rotate the camera, should I say. It's Alt middle button to move it around, pan it about, and then it's Alt and right button to zoom in and out, or you can of course use the scroll wheel. So anyone familiar with Maya will be familiar with that, and if not, it's a fairly simple procedure. You can also move the object itself instead of moving the camera by space, and middle mouse button will sort of drag the object around there. Okay, so let's look at UVing this, and if you're brand new to UVing, what we're attempting to do here is take this 3D model and make it flat. So in UVLayout, this is really quite a simple procedure for something like this. We select an edge and we press C. This will cut the edge, and you'll see the edge that we've cut is red, and the edges that it thinks it should follow along to are yellow. So once we've got that cut, because I'm going to cut the front and the back differently, as this wall panel, and another thing you need to think about is what's actually going to be visible in scene. Now as this wall panel is going to be in shot, but the back of the wall panel is going to be recessed into the wall, I'm going to separate the front away by pressing enter. So as soon as you have your cut mark, just come up to your object, hover your mouse over it, press enter, and that will cut away what you've told it to. Now we've got these two pieces here, but if you can imagine trying to flatten this out, if it were a kind of cardboard box, that's not going to be possible to flatten at the moment. It's going to have a lot of stretching around here. So I'm going to dump this into the UV view by pressing D, and I'm going to attempt to flatten it without doing any more cuts, and I'll show you the problems we'll run into. So D to drop that in, go to the display menu, UV, this will show our UV. Now at the moment this looks more like a polygon. That's because it hasn't been flattened. So I'm going to click F anywhere outside the model itself, then I'm going to drag a box around everything that needs to be flattened. Now it's a UV. However, if I go into the 3D view, you see these bright bands of red here? That would be bad. This sort of pastel greenish color is what you're looking for. That means it's kind of perfectly flat. Deep reds and deep blues mean they're either squashed in or pinched out, which I can show you by pushing T and then using the plus minus keys to get a smaller image here. You see these are all tiny squares and these are not. Yep, that's not a good sign. So let's go back into the UV view and hit F for flatten. Okay, now this is all flattened out. You can see these are bright red, no good. So I'll need to cut them here. And F for flatten. You can see that's now all gone this green color. and that means it would be perfectly flat. Now the caveat to that is it means we have seams here, 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 and here. So if I show you that on the 3D view, you'll actually be able to see it. Perfect squares, which is what you're looking for in a UV map. It's these perfect squares, no stretching, no bulging, no pinching. But you do have a seam, which means when you come to texture paint this, if we look at the UV view, if you were in Photoshop now and you wanted to make this seamless, you'd have to do some clever Photoshop work. And that brings us to another point. When is it better to have seams, and when is it better to have pinching and stretching on your UV? Well, it's entirely up to you. A hard rule of thumb that I normally use is if it's a hard surface model, it's generally better to have seams. The trick is to put those seams in such a place that they're not so visible, or to put them where a naturally occurring seam would be. So in the case of this wall panel, this would be built with 4 pieces of wood that would be cut into mitered edges. So if I have a seam here, that's absolutely fine, because I would expect the direction of the wood grain to change from this piece to this piece. So what we're looking to do with UVing is we're basically looking to create seams to alleviate stretch and pinch within the UV map, but we're also looking to create those seams in such a way that they're not so noticeable come render time. Okay? There are occasions when you want to put up with a bit of pinch and stretch. For instance, if I was doing the UV for this, and this little area here was kind of stretched, then you can generally get away with this, because it's never going to be rendered up this close, and besides, it's such a small part, no one's ever going to see it. So you've got to come with this to the point of view that you're always going to have seams or stretch in a UV map. It's always going to be a compromise between one of those two things. The more seams you have, the more difficult it becomes to texture paint in certain circumstances. But also, the less stretch you're going to have. The more stretch you have, somewhat the more easier your UV map is going to be to deal with. But again, then it's going to be stretched. So you're going to have to make that determination yourself. And throughout the course of this tutorial, I hope to give you a few examples of that. But for this, we know we want a seam here. So I'll stop waffling on and we'll just get some work done. So we know we need a seam here, 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 and here. So this, again, we can do this in the UV view or the 3D view. I'm going to do it in the 3D view here, the editor view. I'm just going to come in and press cut, 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 and cut. But you'll see here that UVLayout thinks we should also cut down here. I do not. So I'm going to hover over the point where I don't want cut and press W to weld. And that's the two main commands you're going to be using in the editor view. It's just C for cut and W for weld. And if we go down here, hasn't quite got this last piece. So make sure that's cut all the way through. Make sure these corners are cut. Okay, cut and cut. Alright, enter. We'll split it apart. Now we can D to drop it in, and this will take us to the 3D view. So hit UV, and there it is. You'll see that it hasn't been flattened. So we can just either click F and drag a box around it, or if it's just one item, just push F. Okay, and the way you can flatten this kind of stuff is you can come here and just continuously push and hold F. While you do that, it will continuously flatten. Now this is perfectly flat already, so that's fine. Now you could come in and say these seams are so close together, it's probably not worth having them as seams, so come in and just press W to weld those back together. You don't have to do that, but it does give you one less seam to deal with. Okay, and now we re-flatten. And you'll see the inside here has gone slightly red. This just means we've got slight stretching here. But if we look in our 3D view, it'll be very slight stretching. You can see it's slightly red here, and I can barely notice that this is not square. So that kind of stretching will be absolutely fine. Alright, so there's our UV wall panel. And, excuse me for waffling on a bit, we'll get into some concepts during the rest of this tutorial. But there it is. So now you pack it and export the model into your favorite 3D package. And to pack this, basically, let's go over to the pack menu and just hit pack all. Alright, so actually I've got lock to tile, which I'm going to turn off. Alright, and we get a 73.9% pack-in ratio, which is pretty good. But the other thing, if we look again in the 3D view, the back of this wall panel, it's not really going to be visible in the render. And I'm assigning it as much texture space as I'm assigning the front of the wall panel, which is going to be visible during the render. So go back into the UV view, press spacebar and shrink this one down, which is spacebar and right mouse, because, you know, it's kind of redundant to have this with as much space in the UV map as this. So I'm just going to pop that there and go back to pack all. Okay, and the reason we're only getting a 59% pack-in ratio is because this has to be square, and obviously this is an oblong. So you're never going to get much better than that with this unless you stretch it out, and then we'll have stretching. So I can then come back in when I've seen the maximum size for this, and I can just scale this up. Again, it doesn't really matter. I just want to assign maximum space to this. Okay, so there's our UV packed. And if we look in the 3D view, you'll see that if you considered these squares to be pixels, so you'd have a lot of pixels available to you on the front and less on the back, which is exactly what we want. Alright, so that finishes off that. And I'm going to be explaining what all these tools do as we go. So we're going to load in something slightly more complicated now, and I can save this out as a UVL file, which is the native format for UVLayout. I'll just save that as a UVL. Okay, let's try something a little more complicated. Let's load in the bed. And again, I'm using the load options poly and new. Okay, now one of the first things we'll discuss in UVLayout is it works in symmetry, and looking at this bed, it's probably been modeled in a half and then mirrored across, or even if not, it looks pretty symmetrical to me. So I should be able to come in here under the edit menu and find the symmetry. So I'm only going to have to work on one half of it, which will speed up operations. So I'm going to click here and I'm going to press spacebar. Now normally Headus UVLayout will tell you what keys to push down here. So left mouse button, pick edge, spacebar, continue. Alright, and the grey is where it's symmetrical, and this yellow is where it's not, and you'll see mesh not perfectly symmetrical. So I think what's probably happened here is these pieces have a different bevel on them. So we can't work with this small part of the mesh in symmetry, but that's fine, as I wanted to cut it out anyway. Because as I see here, we've got the same situation as our wall panel, where this will need a seam cut in it. So first things first, let's just cut these pieces out. So cut. And again, that's just the C key, and that was the wrong edge. That's what happens to people that don't zoom in properly. And I'm just cutting around this. And that again is the wrong edge. Sorry folks, having a bit of a viewport conniption here. And there we go. So you'll see it has actually mirrored it on this side as well, and we don't want to cut these bits out, so let's just weld, weld, weld and weld, making sure we've still got our cuts in place. We have. So what we're doing is we're just cutting this piece out the furniture so we can deal with it separately. Enter. You'll see that they both pop out, and let's drop these into the UV view. So D and D. Okay, and now I'll go to UV, and as this is the only part of our mesh that's not symmetrical, I'm going to get it out of the way first, and then if I look on the editor, I'll have a perfectly symmetrical mesh to work with. Alright, so UV, and let's deal with these. Now I'm going to press F outside, flatten them both, and I know these are going to need to be split here. So it's where a seam would naturally occur as well, which is my preferred place to put the seams, of course. So I'm going to come in and I'm just going to cut, and I'm going to keep cutting until I've got the whole thing. Now you can try Shift C. Cut will generally only cut about 10 edges, so Shift C will continue cutting until it runs into a problem. Okay, it ran into a problem straight away, so we're going to have to go manually and tell it what to cut. There we go. We'll just cut all 4 edges out. So, you know, there's the point I touched on earlier. To alleviate stretching, we put seams in, but it's extremely important where those seams end up. I mean, you wouldn't want a giant big seam down the front of the thing that's going to be most predominant in your scene. Let's press enter to cut that out. Okay, and that didn't cut very well. Let's try flattening it out. So F to flatten. Okay, and I can see that this has not been cut. Okay, that's just not being happy. Let's try the cut here. There we go. It's because this is mirrored without being in perfect symmetry, which is one of the reasons why I decided to pick it. Because, you know, when that happens and you're working on a mirrored model, it can become quite a pain in the backside. So we're going to have to go backwards and forwards and just keep cutting until we've cut out all these. So I'm just cutting and flattening so I can see where I'm supposed to be cutting again. There we go. You know, and it does become quite difficult sometimes to deal with these things that are not in perfect symmetry when you're trying to use symmetry to cut them. In fact, this is one instance when this probably would have been easier to cut these in the 3D view, but you know, you live and learn, as they say. And there we go, we've almost got it now. Let's just come in here, cut this one, these ones. Okay, we've got one little piece here to cut. And again, I'm just cutting and flattening. And one here. There we go, this one just seems to have opened up nicely. Close, but no cigar, folks. Okay, there we go. The bright yellow that you're seeing is just telling you that it's out of symmetry, which is absolutely fine. You know, the rest of the model will be easier because it's in symmetry. I picked this model specifically to just show you what happens when you work in symmetry and, you know, you've got a piece that is not. It's a pain in the backside, basically, but there we go. So all I've done, really, even though that looked a bit fiddly, was just chop down where the natural seam line would be. I can now straighten this one up and just press spacebar and left mouse button, and that will let you rotate it. So let's get that back straight, put those two pieces together. Now if we take a quick look in the 3D view, press T for texture, you can see we've got that nicely UV'd. So let's jump back to the editor and see what we've got left here. Right, so I want these legs to be as seamless as possible. Now as they're squares, they're going to have a seam in, but I want to put that at the back. So let's go and chop these legs out first. So we'll find a suitable position for the cut, which will probably be about here, I think. Yep. And did that go all the way around? No, of course it didn't, because that would be far too easy. There we go, let's cut that. And let's cut it at the bottom. And there we go. So that's two cuts in there, which you can see have been mirrored over to the other side. So press enter, and both of those should just pop free. They do, and that's space and middle mouse button. Now, while we've got them, let's put the seam in the least obvious place, so down the back here. And again, that will depend on your render, because maybe you'd be rendering the bed from above and down, in which case you might decide to put the seam somewhere else. But for me, I'm rendering from the front, so I want the seams at the back. Let's chop out these legs here. Let's just cut around there. And I think that probably got the whole thing. Yeah, it did. And we don't need to do this side, of course, because we're in symmetry. So come up here and let's chop the top of the leg off again. Okay, when in doubt, basically, especially with a hard surface, cut stuff out. You can always weld it back together later on in the UV view. And I just press enter, make sure that that pops free. It does. which of course means this one will also pop free. Okay, so that's the legs cut off. Now let's cut the bottom legs off. So come in here, we're going to cut down these bottom legs out. So cut here, and I want to cut the leg away from the bed. Cut here, cut. Well, you'll see we've got some extra lines in here, but I'll worry about tidying those up when I've got the cut I want. Okay, there is the cut I want, so let's weld that away. We need to put another cut in here. There we go. And any more excess cuts? Yeah, there's one. And there's one. Don't need that. Okay, so there's the leg that's been cut around. So press enter, and that leg should just pop free. Now, in order to flatten this out, we can't do that with the bottom on it, so let's come down and cut the foot of the leg off. There you go, done. And we need to put a seam in it. So, best place for a seam? Well, least visible, once again, which would be here. So there you go. So we'll have a seam just running down this bit here. Okay, and the other one should have popped free too. Now, do the front legs. Just going to cut them away again. And let's weld that up. So again, just really simple C and W in this particular view. Let's cut down here. Cut and weld. Basically, we're just going to chop this leg off and make sure we don't have any extraneous welds in there. We're going to need to cut across the top to cut it away from that top bed frame. Alright, that looks pretty good to me. Enter, space and middle mouse button just to move it out of the way. Make sure that it actually did pop free. And cut. And I thought I saw an extra yellow line go up there. I did. Weld. Pop that free. And obviously I forgot to cut the bottom out, so let's pop that free. Alright, so there's all the legs, both top and bottom. Okay, so before we go any further, let's just drop these legs into the UV view. Just hit D on each one. And you'll of course only need to do one because they are in symmetry. And let's go to the UV. Alright, so let's take one of these and flatten it out. So I just pressed F on it. If you want to continuously flatten, when you've got something a little bit more complicated, you can press spacebar and F, and this will continuously flatten. So, you know, hold space to stop. Okay, you'll notice this one was in darker grey, so flattening it was absolutely pointless, because if I were to say totally mess it up, and I'm just holding Control and middle mouse button to drag points out, so if I was to totally mess that up, I just come over to the one that's in symmetry with it and press S. So you don't actually need to flatten out both. So if I press F here, drag a box around these just to flatten them all, and I take this one and I flatten it out. Okay, so I can see here that I've got a bit of a problem with this. Obviously it was still connected at the bottom. So if I press Shift D, this will drop it back into the editor view so we can take a look at what might be causing a problem. Okay, so it doesn't appear to have the split here. Let's just put another cut in here so we know what we're dealing with. Okay, and let's drop that back in the UV view, and now we have a cut out section which we'll deal with in a second. So into UV. Okay, and there's the bit we just dropped back in, so let's flatten it. And if I press S now, because this one's in symmetry, that will also be flattened. Although it seems to be been flattened and gone somewhere. There it is. There we go. So, you know, you only need to work on one and then S, and the other one will become exactly the same. But now we've got this problem where we've accidentally cut these bits off, and we don't want tiny bits hanging around in our UV map. So if I go up to the edge of one of these and press W for weld, you'll see it thinks it should be welded to here, and I think it's right. So I'm going to move my mouse over this and press M. which for some reason, probably because of the symmetry, isn't working so well. Okay, M would normally magnet snap this, but it's not working, so I'm going to do it by hand. And we'll cover all this as we go along. And then I'm just going to press enter. Okay, for some reason, I know why, folks. Sometimes I'm just thicker than the village idiot. Looking at these, they haven't actually been flattened, and until something has been flattened, you can't do anything with it. So F, drag a box around, flatten. Now I should be able to press M, and that magnet snaps those to those. Just flatten this out a little bit, and this one, and then I'm going to press enter to join these together. And this is now overlapping, so we come in, hit W for weld, and you'll see it's done it. Same thing on both sides. Now I can flatten this out, press S, and the other one will also be flattened. Okay, so these will be the other back legs, and hopefully there'll be no issues with these. So I'll just press F for flatten, perfect, and S to repeat the UV map. Same with these, flatten it, S to repeat it, flatten it, S, and these, whoops, and I've actually hit S there on the corner, which is not what I wanted at all. So come in and push S again. S is for special, and we'll probably have a look at that in a little while. Okay, so when you've got small fiddly bits, like these bits for instance, and this one here that's blown up, it can become quite difficult to manually flatten, because what happens is you move your mouse over, you press F, the thing jumps, and then the flatten stops and the whole viewport freezes. Just click anywhere, and you see now I've got this, so I could push F, and then it's a pain. So you can either do the Shift F trick, which will continuously flatten, or there's a couple of other ways to do that. At the moment I'm not too bothered, so let's just undo that, and I'm going to find out, because these bits look strange to me, so I'm going to Shift D and dump them back into the 3D view, into the editor view, sorry, and let's see what they were and why they're causing us so many problems. Okay, so they were these pieces here, and once again it appears that they don't have a seam in them. So, well, I was pretty sure we had cut a seam in them, but it didn't appear to take, so cut the seam, drop them back in, UV, and now I'm going to F to flatten both of them, and then I'll just flatten, and then I can just press S on here. Anyway, as I was saying, if you've got these pieces and you want to flatten them, you can, and they're fiddly, so your mouse keeps slipping off, you can use Shift and F, like I said, which will continuously flatten, or you can go up to Optimize and just Optimize, which will try and flatten the entire lot, or basically anything you have selected. So Optimize, it will run for a minute, or until it finds the pixel change is so small it wouldn't be noticeable at a 2K map res. If you go in for 4K, put it up to 4K. Now most of this stuff is already pretty flat, so I think this will probably just run for about a second. There you go, all optimized. Okay, so at the moment we have pretty much a virtually pinch and a squash-free UV. So, and we've nearly pretty much done this entire bed now. So let's get back in there and finish it off. Alright, so now we just need to look at how we're going to cut this. So I'm going to deal with this headboard as a separate piece. So let's just cut it out. There we go. Alright, that's it, done. Fine, and again, I'll probably want to deal with this top kind of lip here as a separate piece. As I said, when in doubt, cut, because you can always stitch back together in the UV view. So that should have popped that off. It did. Alright, now we've got this long big piece here, which, because this is the back and not so important, I'm going to just chop off. So I'm going to cut, and that pops the back free. Alright, now, inside of the bed, it's going to be completely covered by a mattress. So, there's very little point to having this inside as occupying as much texture space as the rest of the bed. So I'm going to cut the inside out, and let's make sure we got it, and then I'm going to need to cut it down here as well. And I don't want this, so let's just unweld it, and let's see if we got another cut in the other corner. We did. Let's unweld that, so uncut that, should I say, and we're going to need this last cut in here. Just check it. Okay, enter. Should pop the center sections of the bed free. Okay, there we go. There, done. Okay, so this is the sides of the inside center, and this is the bottom. So this is going to need a seam in it, and as it's never going to be seen, it doesn't really matter where that seam is. So I'll just come here and cut one. There we go. Let's drop this into the UV view. Okay, and this is basically stuff that's never going to be visible. So, you know, I've got this selected now. I'll come here, rather than holding the F key down, I'm just going to click optimize. There we go. That'll just, you know, and this has happened. Okay, I'm kind of hoping this would happen at some point. You've got this, and because it's got little tiny kinks in it, UVLayout's tried to flatten it and, you know, pay attention to these little tiny bevels, but I don't want that. So I'm going to hold my mouse over here, click R, and it won't let me. So R normally would make this a rectangle, so instead I'm going to click I, which will make these straight lines. Okay, so there we go, perfectly straight. Now this one I see here, I'll try R on. Yep, that worked fine, perfectly straight. This one, R, perfectly straight. Now, because I know this is never going to be seen, and we want to avoid these extra long pieces because they're difficult to pack, I'm going to cut this down the middle. And once again, it's a part that's not going to be seen, so I don't care where the seam is. And this one and this one. Right. Let's get these in some semblance of order. Okay, and I'm going to drag a mouse around them, and I'm going to scale them down to a much smaller size. Again, just because I do not want to assign as much texture space to those as these parts, which will make up the visual portion of the bed. And in order to get this a bit better, I'm just going to rotate this one. And then I'm going to draw a box around it. This will just help me later on when it comes to packing. So select them all, under pack, new box, draws a box around it. Okay, now I can grab the whole lot as one entity and move it around. And also, the box helps me organize myself because I know that everything that I'm going to put in a box will be a UV that's not important. So back to the UV editor view. Okay, and now we've just got a few bits left to deal with. This can be dropped straight in because that will just flatten. Okay, this can be dropped straight in, and this needs some seams cut in it. So again, I'm going to go for the natural point where I think there would be a seam. So here and here, and I don't actually want the seam to be on the top. So that's done that. Pop that open. The other side should have popped as well. It did. So now we can drop this in. Okay, and let's have a look at the bottom of the bed here. So this part's a bit decorative, so we're going to have to chop that out. That can be a part on its own. Okay, and that should actually just pop free now. There we go. And because we've got these corner bevels again that you often see on furniture, we know we're going to need to cut down here. So there you go. Whoops, I missed one. There, done. And this one. And I've missed that same little one again. Cut, come on. There you go. And because we're in symmetry, the other side will be done as well. So, done, drop. Now we need to look at how we're going to lay this bed out. Well, you know, let's get rid of the bottom because, again, it's not going to be visible. So we'll just come in here and chop out this bottom piece. So, cut and cut. That's the wrong one. Okay, there we go. So that's cut the bottom piece out. Now I'm going to drop that into the UV view, and I'm going to take care of that straight away. Here's that big bottom piece, so F to flatten, and then scale that down. Whoops, I still have those things in there selected. Then scale that down. Okay, and that can also go in my box, because again, I know it's not of particular importance. So put that in my box, and let's have a look here. And I'll sort that out when we come to packing. I just want everything kind of organized into one place. Now we'll flatten this stuff out when we finish cutting up the bed. So back to the editor. Alright, and here we go. Let's take a look at what we're left with. Alright, so we want, a fairly nice UV on these sides, because all this stuff is going to be very, very visible. So let's come here and put a seam in between the bottom side and the top side. So cut for that. Okay, and if I just press enter now, that should pop out the whole side panel as one unit. And we've got a leg in between here, so we don't have to worry about seams in between there. I'm going to do the same thing for the back and the other sides as well. So there we go, that one's out on its own. And come on. And it's not letting me cut along that line. It's just sometimes gets a bit fiddly. You see where you're actually cutting, and I think it's not letting me cut along that line because there is no line, because obviously we're in symmetry. So there you go, stupid mistake number 2, I think, but not to worry. Now we need to deal with this. Okay, so this is not going to flatten out while it's attached there, so let's cut it there and there, and we don't need this big one. We just want to get this edge away from this one. So let's just hit go there and do the same up here. We'll probably need to do, no, actually not. Yeah, there we go, little tiny one. So there we go, that's cut that. Alright, now let's think about where we want the seam here. So I think this thing should just flatten out on its own basically, but that would give me something that would be difficult to pack. So I'm actually going to cut it down here, and cut down there. Alright, so we don't need this cut. So that's kind of chopped it into one section, and we'll chop it into a section here too. Alright, so that's out on its own now. It's not going to flatten with this corner, still like so. Okay, why is it not letting me do that? I know. We've got some double faces here in the model, which happens from time to time. Or some faces that are very close together, so it makes it difficult to see on this view. But if I peek in here, I should see a place to cut. And come on. Okay, this is being a bit more of a pain than I normally like. Alright, this I'm going to have to cut, I think, in the UV view, unless I can get it from underneath. There we go, that's cut it. And we're probably going to have a similar problem over here then. And what do you know, we do. So let's cut this out. You run into these little niggles from time to time. Fortunately enough, UVLayout is pretty good at getting rid of them. So, we want to cut around the bottom there and come in and cut. And we need to cut here as well. We don't want that cut, and we don't want that cut. If you do find yourself with too many cuts, you can always weld things back together again. It's not really an issue. Let's see what we've done there in the corner. Okay, and we won't need that cut. Stop that. Okay, so that looks like it's come pretty far apart, and that should now all flatten out quite nicely. So let's drop that into the UV view. And let's go, and I just want to check that part before I go any further. So there it was, fairly cut out for both sides. So let's just flatten this. So I'm going to just press space and F and see how that flattens out. There you go. You can see we had some double faces there. Or actually not double faces, but we had faces that were very close together. So we've got some overlap. We're going to need to weld that overlap back together. Okay, so I'm just pressing W to get that welded back together. And let's see where this edge welds up to, shall we? So W, and it welds to there. So I'm just going to press Enter and weld it up. Okay, we've got some slight stretch in here. It's not really a cause for concern. Can we weld this? No, because that bit does not connect to that bit. So if you've done a weld you don't want, you can come in and just hover mouse over it and press backspace. Okay, so this part is done. Let's press S and that part will be done. Okay, now we've got some slight stretch in here, and apart from just flatten, you know, one thing you can do, and you can see I got rid of that stretching with just a flatten. One thing you can do is scale it up and flatten it back down again. This helps UVLayout, you know, when it's flattening. There's an automatic process for this. You can press Shift and B, and that scales it up and continuously flattens it until you tell it not to. Okay, so just press and hold space bar to stop. Now if I look in here, this is a bit higgledy-piggledy. So let's see if this part would be joined to that part, and it would. So I just press W there, and no, not on that one. So let's flatten out and see what we got. Let's come in here, and this seems to be a very strange occurrence. So Control, middle mouse, and just drag that out. Okay, there we go. And yeah, this is looking alright for me. This part here that's a bit messy is actually underneath the bed. So again, you shouldn't really spend, or I wouldn't really spend too much time on getting a perfectly straight and square UV for something you can't actually see at render time. So now I've done this one, I'm going to press S, which will obviously mirror those changes across to that one. Okay, so there's their two pieces done. Let's go up back to Editor. Okay, and we can start dropping some of these side panels in. This, 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 and this. Okay, and you see we had a little piece there. We'll stitch that back together in the UV view. Alright, so seams. I'm gonna have to have one on the front here. Can't avoid it. But it is between a join between two pieces of wood. So, you know, not necessarily a bad place to put a seam. Okay, let's just pop that free. And let's just do the back one. And let's pop that free. There we go. So this has got the top surround part of the bed. Now I'm going to need a seam, so I'm going to put it in the back, of course. Let's just cut that. And a seam for this front one. Let us cut. Done. Drop those into the UV view. Drop and drop. Now we've got this, which is going to be a little more of a problem, because we need to put a seam in this. Okay, so we're going to go for the inside edge here. So let's just cut here, and I don't want the seam down there, it's too visible. So cut there and cut here. And we're probably going to need to go over. We are. Okay, and cut here. Because, you know, you just got to think about how these things would be laid out flat in real life, really, how you'd flatten out a cardboard box. And I do not want you. There we go. Alright, if you ever get lost in the viewport, by the way, home button will just drop you back to everything that's on screen. Okay, and I'm going to open that up. So that should now be capable of lying out flat. We shall see. So let's drop that, and you'll see I've immediately shifted to the editor, to the UV, actually to the 3D screen. Because I've got no more UV map left, I can't go to Ed. So let's go here, okay, and I'm going to select everything that hasn't been flattened, and I'm going to flatten it. Okay, I'm then just going to do these one by one. So this is the front of our bed, which this bit fits in. You'll see it no longer fits because it's been flattened out. So let's start stitching stuff together. Now I've got it in the UV view, cut it out in the editor view to what made sense. Now I can come in and hit weld, Shift M, and that will bring the piece that this is supposed to connect to. Now I can see that that's not going to happen because this line is supposed to connect here and this has been flattened out. So there's no chance of recombining these two, which is fine. You know, it's a natural point for a seam, but when I'm in here I do like to come along and see if there's anything that can be, you know, joined back together. So this, for instance, where would this be welded to? And an easy way to see is just press weld, Shift M, and again that's going to be dealt with that, so you know that's fine. It's not going to be joined together. Let's just put these bits here, and there's the front of the bed. So this is all the really important stuff, and there we go. Let's grab these and let's figure out what we've got going on here. So all of these for a start are rectangles, so I'm just going to R, and R. There you go, and now they're all perfectly flat. Let's hit S when we're over them, so if they have an opposite number that will also be done. Let's come here, flatten this out, that's done. Press S to get its opposite number if it has one, and I'm just going to go and flatten all these pieces out. Okay, and they all flattened out rather nicely, really. Now we've got a little bit here that's been cut off something, obviously by accident, so I'll see where it goes. I'll just press W there and Shift and M, or just M in this case will be fine, and that will have gone now to where it's supposed to be. There we go, it's supposed to be up there, so there's no point in having, whoops, okay, I've got an extra weld on the other side that I need to take off, so there we go. Alright, so we seem to be fairly together now. I'm just going to take these weld marks off because they're no longer necessary, so just hold my mouse over and hit backspace and make sure everything has been flattened. Everything is perfectly flat. Let's go and take a look at it. Alright, so I'm going to kind of minimize this UV map here. Okay, and you'll see that here we've got some bright red parts, which means that we've got something that hasn't been flattened. Now these are bright red because they're at the wrong size at the moment, but this should not be bright red. This is very visible in shot. So if I press G here, it will highlight these polygons in this view, which will also highlight them in this view. Okay, that looks pretty flat to me. So I'm trying to find where this non-flat part is, and what I'm going to do, because I've got bits all over the place at the moment, is I'm just going to do a quick pack. So go down to pack, where are we? Pack, and just put pack all. There we go. Okay, I'm going to deselect everything, and the front of this bed is looking a little red, so I'm just going to flatten that out a bit more. And I'm now wondering why I have this issue here. Still have it with these red bits. So I'm going to resize everything so it's back to normal size, because obviously I've shrunk these down by accident, but Again, not really a problem. Go back to the UV. Go back to, where are we? We'll want move, scale, rotate. Select everything. And we're going to rescale U and V. There we go. Now I'm going to check the UV 3D view and see if the stretching on those things has gone away. It has not for some reason. Alright, so let's have a look. Okay, I think I had a piece there. Now I can see the bits I was selecting. So I've got a piece there that I hadn't flattened properly. And you know, if you do see that, you can always run optimize, which will do everything. Okay, 3D view. Alright, so I seem to have a pretty square UV map. You can see here we've managed to avoid pretty much seams where we're going to be visible, and our seams instead are at places like split down the leg here where you'd expect a seam, at the back of the legs, at the back of the bed. So we've got no stretching on this UV map, and we've got seams in, you know, good places. Now one last thing would be to collect these parts that were inside and resize them again. So I'm just pressing G to highlight those polygons. Okay, and basically I'm highlighting all the polygons that have parts that aren't going to be so visible. And you can press Shift G to unhighlight. So let's unhighlight those errors we were looking for earlier. Okay, there we go. So back into the UV, and I can see all these parts that are not really going to be that necessary. Okay, and because I have the polygons selected, it's not allowing me to drag these out, so I can press Shift G and just drag a box around it. There we go. Whoops. Sorry folks, wrong button. There we go, that's not what I wanted at all. Shift G. Okay, so that gives me everything that's perhaps not visible or so visible. So let's give it a pack up. And remember, our goal here is to maximize texture space for the things we can see and minimize texture space for the things we can't. So I'll just scale that down and drag it back into its little box and hit pack all. Give it a second. Okay, and as you can see, I've got a packed UV. Now, the more observant amongst you might have noticed that mine is looking slightly different to the one I had about 2 seconds ago from your perspective, and this is because UVLayout took the time to massively crash on me during that packing. So please save your work before you pack. And here's another one I've just done along exactly the same lines. So there we go. So that's how it finished out anyway. So basically we've got the big squares in the parts we can't see and the small squares in the parts we can see. Now I'll cover packing in more depth during the next part of the tutorial, but this is basically what you're looking for, a well-packed UV map to minimize the space that you can't paint on, and we get it even better than this in subsequent parts. So apologies for that crash, and I'll see you in the next part. Hope you found this interesting. Cheers. Okay, welcome back. In the last part we tackled our bed, and in this part I'm just going to quickly run you through this room. Now this is pretty simple, and you know, the reason I'm going to UV this is later on we'll be using some wallpaper, and it's good practice. I just want to get across the concept of kind of cutting off the inner walls and leaving the outer walls by themselves. So what we want to do is cut this out into separate rooms, flatten those rooms out with as little seamage as possible, and then deal with the outside just very, very quickly. So let's just get started. Let's cut across here. I'm going to cut this room out. So we know we don't need this line here, so let's get rid of that. And I'm just putting extra cuts in these corners, so when I take this line out, it doesn't go backwards at all. So that's the top cut out, and I think I see a little bevel there. I do. So we're going to need to cut around that. Nice and simple. Now I would also need to cut around the bottom of the room normally, but this room has an open border, so I don't need to do that. And to separate the walls away, I'm going to need to cut around the windows and doors. So quickly cut this out. And again, making sure to take out any extra lines we don't need. Done. And I'm just going to need to cut around this door frame as well. Now this room is relatively simple to do, you know, compared to the bed that we've just done, but this room's going to have some stretching components to it, and I just wanted to show you that. You know, it seems ridiculous because it's a perfectly square room, but if we come in, what we've got is a little lip that's been cut into the walls here, and this was, if we look at our final scene, a recessed lip for these wall panels to sit in. So we're never going to see that. So I don't mind if it's stretched, then I'm just going to show you that now. So let's cut down here. And that should be this room cut out. Double check, have a look around, cut out the windows, cut out the doors, cut across the ceiling. And we've got a spare line there, actually. So let's weld that away and return to pull it out. Okay, let's do the same with this other little room here. You know, and it's why UVLayout is my preferred tool for this kind of stuff. I really like how visual it is, and you know how quick it is. Obviously I'm kind of working at a fairly slow speed here because talking and working at the same time is not the easiest thing. And just cut around the door frames. And again, I'm going to just reiterate the point that I am just using C for cut and W for weld. Okay, and space, enter should now just detach that and pop it free. Done. Now, these are going to be obviously predominantly visible in the shot. None of this other stuff is. So, we're going to look for a few other things that are going to be visible in the shot. This doorway is probably going to be visible. And the inside of this door is probably going to be visible, or this door portal, if you like, door hole, door frame. And this one is attached at the bottom, so we're going to have to cut it there. Same operation with this. 1, 2, wrong one. And weld away the bits we don't need, as per usual. Okay, so that looks like it's going to pop right out of there. Let's check it, and it does. Okay, so now anything else in here going to be visible? Probably the inside of this door, so let's come and take that. Take this, and take this. So just weld this away and weld this away and detach this. Done. Okay, and this window frame, last piece, and that's kind of all the visible elements in this scene. So enter the detach, and that should just pop right out. Alright, so that deals with all our visible elements. Now this is going to need a seam in it somewhere, so I'm going to cut it down here. There we go, and same with this one, just cut down here. That's right at the back of the room, so we're not really going to see it that much. Okay, so I've got this bit that's just kind of superfluous to requirements. Let's press D and drag a box around these, drop them all in. Now I'm going to go to the UV view and just hit optimize. And in fact, what I've done is I've hit optimize without these being flat. So just F to flatten, mouse over, done, then optimize. Okay, and we'll see this optimizing these bits and pieces out. Just give it a minute. It's actually quite a fascinating process to watch. Okay, so now we're left with a collection of bits and bobs. In fact, we've got one here that's completely twisted, and I think this is the window frame we've got to cut a seam in. So let's just cut a seam in that, and Shift F, let it flatten out. Okay, that's flat. The other thing is, I know this is a rectangle, or a square, 4 sides, so I can just press R. Same with this, same with this, same with this. Okay, so that's nice and easy. They're the door and window frames, basically. All done, perfectly flat. And when we come up here, you can see this huge amount of stretch here. Now, this is recessed into a wall and can't be seen. So if it could be seen, I'd probably cut it out independently and flatten it. But as it's never going to be seen in the render, I see no real point in dealing with it. But what we've got is a nasty sort of curvature here, which I really, really don't want. So I'm going to come up and press I and shift and flatten. And that'll flatten us out. Now, spacebar to stop that flatten. And once again, I here. Yeah, just making everything nice and square. As I said, even in that case, that will cause some stretching. It is stretching in places where it won't be visible. So let's see if we can make this perfectly flat square too. There we go, perfectly square. Now let's do the same for this piece. So come in, make sure it's flattened out nicely, and then tell it you are straight. There we go, done. Okay, so that's all the visible elements of the room. Now, if you want to really quickly do the non-visible elements of the room, which again is part of the reason I picked this, I can show you the segment menu. If I just close some of these down, you've got a part here called segment. So let's go to the editor, press G, which will let you select polygons. In fact, as soon as you press G, it will tell you what can happen here. So I'm going to use the middle left mouse button, which will mark inside the box, and that will mark all the polygons inside this box. Then I'm going to go down to segment, which will allow UVLayout to just cut this up on its own, because I don't care about it, so I don't care really where it puts the seams. I'm going to go segment mark polys. I'm going to leave the weld to all. I'm going to ask it to weld as much together as it possibly can, and I'm just going to hit segment mark polys. Okay, so that's done. Let's have a look. And that's what it did. So it kind of gave us a nice flat layout. The problem is it's not going to be too good for packing, so I can now come in, kind of chop it out a little bit. Going to need to zoom here, so let's just chop along here and chop along here. Cut this out. Let's break this and this away. And yeah, we don't want that connected really. So, and we don't want this connected. Let's cut. Let's just weld that up and see why that didn't cut. It's that little bevel there. So not a problem. And weld and enter, and that pops away. Let's see what we got here. There, done, done. You're trying to avoid this type of thing. It make it difficult to pack, and as I said, as we don't care about seams in this bit. Okay, so that should be all right. Let's just cut this one away. Now these we know are rectangles, so we can just go straight to making them rectangles. And this we just flatten, 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 and flatten. You know, even though we don't really care about these pieces so much, there's no point doing a bad job when you can do a good one. And it may come a time when you do need to throw some sort of texture on the outside, so you know, it's better to do it right the first time around. Alright, and let's just grab this lot. I'm not going to worry about packing it. I'll let UVLayout pack it. But I am going to grab it all. What's this part here? There we go. I am going to grab it all and scale it. Because, you know, it's the outside of the room, so it makes no sense to assign that much texture space to it. Now, let's have a look in our 3D view. We'll hit T, and let's make these squares a bit smaller. And you can see, again, if you think about these like pixels, the inside of the room has a high pixel density for textures, and the outside of the room a very low one, which is pretty much exactly what we wanted. So let's go to pack, and I'm just going to let this pack it up for us. So one problem I note here is that these are going to cause problems because the UV has to be square. This is going to be, too much. So we're going to find a couple of natural seam points. There's one here in the corner by the window. Let's just cut through that. And there's one here in the corner of the door. So let's cut through that, and that will be able to pack then in a more square pattern. Okay, so let's just go to the pack menu. And unlike last time, because, I'm going to save it. So just UVL, save, dismiss, pack all. Okay, 73% pack ratio. You can generally do a better packing job by hand most of the time, but 73% is kind of okay. 80 or 90% would be nice, but you can't always get that. So we can actually make this better. We can turn the quality from low from fast to best, and let's see if it can do a little better than that 70%. And of course, when turning the quality up, you're going to experience longer UV time. So 72, no, not really. Let's go then and allow it to rotate the pieces. This will rotate them in sort of 90-degree increments to see if it can fit them in. So as it can only rotate in 90-degree increments, I'm going to come in and manually straighten this one up. There we go. Alright, so let's turn on the rotate and pack all. Now I'm going to pause here because the rotate on this can take a couple of minutes. Okay, so there we go. I got it to 73%, so it wasn't a great change really. If you're a fan of jigsaw puzzles, I'd recommend you pack by hand because you can generally pretty much always get a better result packing your own. But 73% is livable with for this. So I'm going to be back in the next part where we'll look at a bit more complicated piece of furniture, something that can't be put into symmetry and has a bit more rounded edges and a bit more organic in shape. So I thank you for watching this part, and I'll see you in a second. Cheers. Hi, welcome back. In this part we're going to look at modeling this, UVing this little table here, this little bedside table. And I picked this piece because now I can show you how to copy UVs over in this and another couple of tricks. So let's start by taking a look at its component parts, and I'm just pressing space and middle mouse button to kind of pull this out the way. And you'll see we've got a drawer inner kind of and an outer. So again, we're going to, try and maximize the space that we actually need and minimize the space that we don't. So I'm going to start with these legs. Now, these legs are actually fairly complicated. They've got little indentations all the way down. There's a V-shaped thing cut into the back. There's a little lip here. There's a little bit there to be dealt with, and there's some, banding and bowing and bits and pieces at the bottom with some more little grooves and whatnot. So let's start by cutting the top and bottom off, because we're never going to be able to flatten when we've got that top and bottom on there. So let's make sure we cut all the way around. And let's just pop that off. Now you'll notice that we're not working in symmetry, but don't worry, and we're not going to be forced to do all these legs separately. I'm going to show you how to do one and copy it on to the others. So I'm going to press Shift C to try and cut around the whole bottom. There we go, magic. And that's popped the leg free. Now we need to make a determination, because this part is a lot fatter, especially with the indentations in this part. I want to put a seam in here. And I might end up stitching that back together later, but for now I'm going to put the seam in a very invisible spot. So I'm going to get it sort of shoved under a gap. And that almost made it all the way around. There we go. Let's just cut that off. Done. And I'm probably going to add another seam in here as well. So let's cut all the way around there. And done. So let's cut the leg up into 5 separate parts so far, a top and a bottom and 3 tubes. Okay, now as I look around here, this is never going to flatten out with this thing stuck around it. So let's cut this thing off. And again, you know, it's right around the back of the piece of furniture, so the fact that it'll have some tiny seams, not so much of an issue. And weld, and weld, and there we go. That one dropped away as well, so let's just cut that one again, and enter to detach, and that should just pop straight away. Now, we know this is not going to flatten without a seam, so let's put one on the back inside edge. There, done. And we also have this part that's going to be a problem when we try and flatten, so let's cut that out too. Whoops, wrong one. There we go. Okay, and weld, because we don't need this. And make sure that's all the way around. And you notice this has also got a cut that's gone straight up the top here. Well, that's fine because we want one there, so cut. And cut this bit out. That should pop away. And that should have a seam all the way up the middle. There we go. Just needed to press enter again. And just checking that goes all the way up to the top here. And it does. Right, perfect. So that's that. That's got a seam in it. Now we need to do these pieces. So again, we need to put some seams in here and make sure they're at the back, because, you know, where else would you want your visible seam? There and there, done and done. Okay, and the bottom is off. Alright, so that looks to be the leg entirely done. Let's hit D and drop the whole leg into the UV view. Okay, so F to flatten. Let's flatten it all at once. And let's just go for an optimize and let it flatten all that lot out for us. Okay, so it's flattish. What has happened here? Okay, we must have a seam in here somewhere that hasn't been cut. So let's shift D to drop that back in and have a look at which piece that was. So we were supposed to have a seam here, but it doesn't appear to have cut it out. So I'm going to come next to it, cut one, there we go, and drop and drop. And we'll sort that out now. So UV, and here it is. Let's flatten it out, done, and flatten this out, and then weld it back together. So W to weld, Shift M to snap it, and just come up and weld all these pieces. Okay, and enter and flatten. Alright, so that's basically flat. And why has this happened now? Okay, so I'm just going to press Shift and middle mouse button, and I'm going to drag this out and see why this has got stuck. Give UVLayout a hand, and then Control and drag these ones out here, just so I can see what's happening in this corner. Okay, let's flatten that back out again. There we go. Sometimes you just need to give it a helping hand. If you'd have pressed spacebar and F there to continuously flatten, it eventually would have worked that out itself. So, and let's flatten this one out. And again, this time I'm going to go Shift B, which will actually do the same as scaling up and flattening. Okay, so this is not a bad, this is not a bad thing to do, scale up and flatten. But we've got an automated version of it. So Shift B, there we go. And that will just keep going. It will get flatter and flatter and flatter as it goes along until you press and hold space to stop. Alright, so now we have our leg. Let's flatten this piece out as much as we possibly can. Shift B, give it a second. Alright, and let's see if we can now stitch some of this back together. So let's W here. which corresponds to this piece. Shift and M to snap it. Okay, and we should be able to stitch a few of these together on either side. And F for flatten. Actually, enter to stitch and F for flatten. Whoops, we need to stitch this one. And okay, I don't like that tearing. Let's see if we can weld a few more of these together. Sometimes, you know, it's better to just leave these separate. Again, you might have to have a discussion with the guy that's doing your texturing, or if you're doing your own texturing, obviously you'll know whether you'd prefer to have some stretching but be able to paint that in one piece, or you'd prefer it in separate pieces with a seam. Okay, and I'm going to shift B just to leave that for a second, see if I can get this bright blue out. Okay, but if we look on the UV map where that stretching would be, sorry, in the 3D view where that stretching would be, it's kind of underneath here. So let's put in a texture, T. You know, you're going to have to get up pretty early in the morning to see that. And the other stretching that we have is actually inside these little tubes, and it's really not noticeable. So again, it just depends on personal preference, whether you prefer to have that little bit of stretch, which in a rounded piece like this I think is fine, or whether you'd prefer to have another seam. Again, down to you. So want to come in back to UV view, and we should be able to stitch this bottom bit up maybe as well. So let's hit W here. Okay, and we can shift M to get that to snap, and I'm going to W all the way along. And press enter, and then F. Whoops. Weld a few more. Now my preferred method is generally pretty much to cut in the editor view. So, you know, when in doubt, as I've said, cut into pieces. And if you need to, you can always come back in later and stitch back together. You know, you can then make the determination whether you want it in separate pieces or not. So that's pretty flat now. We've got some stretching, but I'm not going to let it concern me because it's in places of least visibility. And quick shift B to let that settle out. Now, you know, depending on how high res this map is going to be, how close I'm going to get to it, I might just go and get myself a cup of coffee now and leave this for 10 minutes to, you know, settle out to its maximum effect. But I'm not going to put you guys through that. So there we go. There's one leg for us. And let's see, these are all the basic component parts of the leg. Now this one I know was round the back, and I actually know it's a rectangle, so I'm just going to press R, and this one can do it flattening out a bit, flatten out a bit, flatten, flatten. Alright, so there you go, one leg. Now we think the problem is we don't have one leg, we have four legs of course, so I'm going to copy over these UVs. So we go to Edit, Copy UV, I need to select a line on here, and then I'm going to press equals, which will see if it can find any similar objects. And in this case it finds four legs, so I'm going to press spacebar, and voila. Isn't that cool? So there you go, as easy as that really. And now we just need to use some of the same techniques that we practiced earlier when we were doing the bed, and again, home key will recenter the view to do this. So I don't want a big seam in the front of this. Where I want my seams is once again in those mitered corners. So I'm going to cut out the front of the drawer. And did you get it all? Yeah, you did. So enter, just pop that off. Shove that over there. That is going to be the inside of the drawer. We're not going to care about that so much. If you were doing a shop with an open drawer, then you might want to spend some more attention on that. But for me, not so much. This is the cupboards, and again I want a seamless bit around the front. Okay, so I'm going to pop that off too, and that's the whole outer cupboard which we actually want to pay attention to. So cut along here for one seam, and then along here for another, weld that, cut, and then we should be able to, let's just put another chop in there, lay that flat. Done. And the only seam we're going to get is at the top back, which is going to be covered up, and right at the back of the cupboard, which is absolutely fine. This is the inside of the drawer, so once again let's cut that free. And we don't want to take these parts with us. We do need to, in fact, let me have a look at this. Actually, I'm going to cut a bit further in. Seeing it now up close, so I'm actually going to cut along this line. And did we get it all? No, we didn't. There we go. Let's just pop that free. Done. That's the inside of the drawer surround, so we need to really care about that because it's going to be in full focus. So again, this is an inside piece. I'm just moving these inside pieces over here together for my reference. Now I got to look at this trim, and what I shall probably do is again chop it across the front. So all of this is going to be stacked under the table, so I'm going to cut this off. And Shift C, see if we can cut a longer line there. We can. Now we're going to have to come in here and Shift C again, try and cut all the way under there. Done. Okay, let's pop the front of that off, and it didn't pop off, which is normally why I try and move it, just to make sure it didn't have, and I missed one, so cut. There we go, pop right off. Okie dokie. So, other things we need to care about this piece are the sides. So let's cut these sides off. Did I get it all? No, of course not. So that should pop the side right off there. There we go. And let's pop this side off too. Again, as we've been doing before, we're kind of separating things out into inside and outside. Pop that side right off, and now we're left with a piece that we don't need to worry about so much. So let's stick it with our collection of stuff that's not that important. Okay, let's come in here, and I'm just going to drop this in, and drop this in, and drop this in. Actually, I dropped this cabinet by mistake. What I wanted to do was drop these two decorative pieces. Okay, and I can drop this because it's been cut. How about these? Yep, these should be fine. Drop, drop, and drop. And this should be okay. Actually, in order to lay that flat, we're going to need another seam down the back while I remember. So drop that in, and this piece is fine also. Alright, so UV view, and I'm just going to F to flatten, let's flatten all this stuff out, and I'm just going to come in here and optimize, see where we get. Alright, perfect. That's the outside of the drawer. Let's just straighten that up. Done. Inside of the drawer, let's have a look, and you can see that this is going to be very visible on in shot. This is kind of this piece that runs around the outside here, the drawer front, so you're definitely going to want that to be nice. So in order to get rid of this stretching, we have to cut a seam. So let's go ahead and cut that seam out. You know, and again, we don't mind a seam here, it's where we would expect one. Whoops, wrong cut. And you know, this all entirely depends on how you intend to texture paint this as well. Seams can be a bit more of a problem in something like Photoshop than they are in Mari or indeed ZBrush. So you know, it's all a compromise depending on how you're going to texture. and you know whether you'd rather have the seam or the little bit of stretch. Come on, cut. Okay, for some reason I can't get that one. Gonna have to zoom in a bit more and cut. Nope, not happy. I'm going to cut. There we go. Whoops. And you see what I've done there? I've accidentally cut the whole top off. So I can come in and weld it back together. There. Just weld here. If you do make an accidental cut, it's not the end of the world. Just come back in and weld the part that you shouldn't have cut off. Right. Flatten. And that should be perfectly flat, which is exactly what I'm looking for, seeing as it's very predominant in the render. Alright, you'll see here our other legs have come in, and they've come in locked. This is because they're all identical, so you could use one texture for all of them. We're not going to, so I will show you now that they actually have all been done. Okay, I will leave them locked for a minute. I'll show you how to deal with that in a sec. Let's just go over here and check this out. Now this has a tiny amount of stretch on it, and if we look in the 3D view, I think we'll probably get away with that. Yeah, really it's here. I mean, I can't even see any stretch on it. Maybe a little bit sort of up here, but again, you know, you're really going to render this angle, and even if you did, the stretch is kind of minuscule. So happy with that. Back to UV, sorry, and let's look at these other bits. Okay, so this bit seems to have come out just fine. Let's just hold F on that. There we go. And these bits, these are the front and sides, so they're absolutely fine. I see a little tiny, no, actually I don't, they're quite perfect really. Alright, so that's good. Anything else we dropped in? I think that was our lot. So let's just shove this one over here. Now, these little decorative bits, they're really dense, and you know, they've got quite a bit of stretching around the outside of them. Now, what I would personally do with this is go Shift F, which will, sorry, that was the Shift F bloats a UV up and then attempts to bring it back down again. And in this case, with such a dense mesh, we're going to be here for a month of Sundays. But I might use Shift F on something like this. So if I unlock this one quickly, Shift F will bloat that up and then completely retry and smooth it back down again. And sometimes you can get a much smoother result this way. Okay, but for us, you know, not really necessary. So just thought I'd show you what Shift F did. Okay, for these, I'm going to scale them up and just flatten them, which I'm going to use the automated process of Shift B. So you can see that red went away immediately. And for something that's like this, that's fairly complicated, I'd probably leave this for a good couple of minutes. But we haven't got time for that. So there's how I would do it, and same thing with this. Just flatten it down and Shift B. Alright, but once again, I'll leave you guys to do that. And if we look in the 3D view, you'll see that's pretty acceptable for something that's this small. Let's make the UV map really tiny. And you can see you've got a bit of stretch in here, but it's not so bad for a little decorative trim. And as I say, you can use a combination of the flatten commands to try and flatten out a bit more, and it will get better. You'll just have to leave it for a few minutes. So back up to the UV view. Let's see what we've got in here that's not good. And the answer is we have nothing in there that's not good. It's all good. Excellent. Back to the editor, and let's just finish this kitty off. So all of these are inside pieces. We don't care. And now we've got the top. So we're going to need a seam here. So let's stick it right in the gap here. So Shift C for cut. And that should have cut all the way around, I hope. Let's just check it. That's fine. Pop the top off. There we go. And the bottom of this thing we don't care about, because it's never ever going to be seen. So Let's cut the bottom off. Did we get it all? Seem to have done. Detach it. There we go. Let's stick it in with that collection of stuff that we don't care about. Alright, and this is going to need probably a seam or two. So I'm going to put one in here. Otherwise it will be a very long piece. And then I want to cut it in half. I don't really want a seam down the front. So I think we might have to live with that long piece. We'll see how it fits in with our UV map. Okay. And let's just drop this in and drop that in to get them out of the way. And we're going to need to do this one. So this one, let's see. Well, let's cut the inside out. As I say, when in doubt, cut. Because you can always put it back together later on. And, you know, this becomes kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. So if you've got a lot of pieces to play with, generally I find that easier to kind of logically work through what goes where after I've cut it out. And this is going to be a lot stretched down here, so let's make a couple of cuts so it can flay outwards. And again, you know, paying attention to where you actually put these cuts. In our case, this is in a recessed well, so this will all be fine. And we need another one over here. Whoops, I got an extra one there. Don't want that. And don't want that. Come on, out you pop. There we go. Job's a good one. Drop that in. Okay, now let's see. So I'd rather avoid any obvious seams on the front here. Don't want obvious seams. Let's cut the bottom off. Because, you know, we're never going to be able to flatten with that on. Or we would be able to flatten with that on, actually. If I could cut across the top here. So do I want to leave this all as one piece? Questions. No, not really, because this magazine track on the bottom of the cabinet, this bottom piece is so close to the floor, if we have a look, that I'm unlikely to get a camera up and under there. So I might as well cut it off and shrink it to save myself some space in the UV, thinking about it. I'll just cut that out. And again, we're going to shove it over here with the bits that, you know, don't need to be so big. Okay, but that still leaves me with the problem to flatten this. So I'm probably just going to cut it. Let's see, let's cut it here. Oh, not there, here. And did we get it all the way around? Nope. And cut. Whoops, that was one too many, was it not? I don't know how I managed to miss this big yellow thing going around here, but there we go. And cut it away. And did that actually cut away? No, missed one. So just cut and weld. Okay, let's just cut that like that for now. And in fact, I want to drop that in and see what that does when we flatten it. Because I've got a feeling that's not going to be possible to flatten, but let's just check. So it's this one. So I'm going to press Shift F on there, and yeah, it's actually flattened out alright. Okay, but that's pretty good because that makes that tiny bit of stretching ever so tiny bit. Let's have a look. Yeah, and there's what we just did. We did this whole piece as one kind of seamless part in there, which is great because it is going to be visible, and you definitely don't want sort of a seam here, which we haven't got. And that whole piece flattened out wonderfully, and the only bits that are in red are jammed in the corners here, so absolutely fine. Perfect, that's done that. Easy as pie. Let's take a look at what else we've got to do. So all bits we don't really care about are over there. I'll save those for last. Let's go into the 3D view, the UV view, and make sure other bits flatten out okay. That's fine. And okay, yeah, that's not so good. Okay, let's just escape that. Okay, so it does have a cut in it. What I'm going to do is just press Shift F. Sorry, that was Space F, and let that flatten out on its own for a couple of seconds. Okay, I actually don't want it too flat. It'd be easier to pack later on. So there's those two pieces. You know, and this is probably a rectangle, so I could probably come in and flatten this whole thing down, but that would make a very long bar, which I don't want to deal with when packing. So that should be fine. Let's flatten this bit out. How's this? This is the top, so I mean this is kind of an important bit here, and it has a little stretching there. So Shift B, and you can make the determination now whether you want this stretching across the front. It is a very small piece across the front, or you want to cut some seams. I'm going to look in the 3D view and have a look to see what I want to do. So I'm going to zoom in here, and my stretching is here, and it's not that bad. So I reckon I probably just, in this instance, come in here and just let it flatten out on its own for a while. So I'd probably give that 5 or 6 minutes and see what it did. If necessary, you may have to cut a little seam here to relieve the tension a bit, but that'll do for me. Alright, so that's all looking pretty good. And back to editor, and let's see what we got left. Okay, so basically we've got the handle left, and I'm going to UV this. Normally I would just put an automatic map and leave it at that, because it's going to be a metal procedural texture, but because we're in kind of tutorial mode here, I am actually going to UV it. So let's take a look at it. Alright, now let's have a look at this bit. This bit is actually got an inside and an outside, so first things first, we need to separate those two things. So cut here and cut here, and for these pieces, you know, I'm going to allow a little bit of stretching because really small pieces. Okay, so that's going to need to flatten out, so let's cut it, and let's cut it. Alright, so drop both of those in and flatten them. Where are we? And there they are, tiny pieces. I told you they were pretty small in comparison to the rest of the UV map. They are tiny. Give that time to unfold. There we go, close enough. And just this piece now. And let it unfold. Come on. Alright, so there's those two pieces. Just straighten them up. Okay, good enough, and let's go back to the 3D view, and we've just done this piece, which you can see here. And I don't like the placement of that seam, but you know, I could have put it round the back. A better choice would have been round the back, of course, just in a bit of a rush. But since it's a circular object, you can just rotate it when you get it back into your 3D program of choice. So let's get a copy UVs. Let's find an edge here. Let's hit equals and see if it can find that bit over there. It can. So back. Done. Okay, so job, as they say, is a good one. Now let's take this, and this time we need to be in editor, of course. This time let's actually split it up the back, and before we do that, pull it out because it's not hollow, so I'm going to have to cut that and that. Done. And let's make the seam this time along the back. Okay, I've got the feeling we're also going to get a lot of pinch in here, so I'm going to put a seam all the way around there. And again, that determination of whether you want to live with the pinching and stretch or you want to live with the seam is entirely up to you. Let's make sure that's cut. Done. Okay, cut, and cut. I'm just pressing enter to activate those seams that we drew in. So drop it, drop it, and drop it. And this piece too, and this piece too. And UV. Okay, there we are. So let's select all those, hit optimize. I could do them one at a time, but you know. Okay, and as you can see, that's got stuck optimized in these. So I'm actually going to just press space to hold that, to stop that, and I'll come in and I'll just do these manually after all. And you can see what tiny pieces these are in you know, comparison to the rest of the object here. So normally, as I said, I wouldn't spend too long on them, but as we are in tutorial mode here, and they're quite twisty and interesting shapes, I think, we'll take a look at how to get them done with the minimum amount of fuss. Come on, flatten out, lovely jubbly. Alright, so there's 3 fairly flat bits without much stretching at all. You got some slight red and some slight blue, but that's going to be barely noticeable. And let's take this one, there we go, and this one. I'm just straightening them up. It doesn't really matter if they're straight or not, to be honest with you, but a little obsessive compulsiveness going on here. There we go, that'll do. And let's just flatten out these last 2 pieces here, which are the discs. Okay, now let's see if we can go into the 3D view and copy this to this. So let's go to copy UV and equals. No, it can't find it. So there's no matching geometry. Now you can force this by selecting an edge and selecting a corresponding edge, which I'll do with these pieces. But for this, I would honestly just kind of UV that. Again, it's quite a fast process, really. So let's go to the editor and take a look where it is. There it is. So, you know, I'll just pause the video now, folks, while I just quickly run through this again. Or in fact, I think I'll just run through it with the video running, and if you don't want to see exactly the same procedure again, you can just skip forward a couple of minutes. So there we go, pretty much done. Now all that remains is just a quick flatten up. And there you go. So it didn't take long at all, really. And as I say, I'm going to show you a trick for forcing that in a second, when the objects are not identical, which sometimes works wonderfully well and sometimes goes terribly wrong. But that's alright, because you can always Control Z, of course. Alright, so there you go, there's the handles. Let's go back to the editor and see what we've got left. Alright, we've got these bits, which again, inside and outside jobs, so just cut all the way around. There's that, that will flatten out nicely. This will not, it's kind of like a sphere, so let's just chop a bit here. Done, done, that will flatten out. Cylinder, easy one, cut the top and bottom off. Easy one, he says. Now I can't get it to cut because I'm pushing the V key, not the C key. And let's put a seam in this across the bottom where it's not going to be as visible. I mean, these are tiny, tiny parts, so it's not really going to be visible anyway. And I think this is probably going to need a seam. So let's cut one here. And that should take enough pressure off that. Okay, so let's drop these components in, see if we can transfer them over to these. So D, anywhere, left mouse drag, drop them all in. Alright, UV, and let's come in and take these components and just flatten. Now what we got there, we got yeah, I see. Let's go to 3D and just confirm that. Yeah, that's this cylinder portion here. And that's going to flatten out a lot better if we put a seam in it. Whoops. So come in and just cut a seam. And that's going to be a rectangle. There we go. Flatten that out a bit. Done. And same with this. Flatten it. And these. And this one. Whoops. Okay, now I might do a quick, shift flatten with those. And this I'm not too concerned about. It's actually inside here. So, I mean, again, with the weird camera angles and not wasting your time on things you don't need to, I'm not going to worry if this is a little bit stretched in here. Alright, so let's see if we can copy some of these. So copy UVs from this and press equals and done. Let's see if we can get the UVs from this. So copy UVs from this, equals, done, and this thing. So once again, copy UVs, equals, and equals, and perfect, it finds a match. Lovely. Okay, so that's most of this handle done. And it's quite an intricate little handle really. It's got quite a few details on it. Now let's pick one of these to do. So let's go to the editor and let's get it from behind because we want the seams wherever possible to be in the back. So let's take one of these things. Now it's going to have end caps, it is, and UVLayout loves n-gons, so we're absolutely fine with those. Okay, n-gons polygon without more than 4 sides, and if you're new to that term, so let's just cut around here, cut around here, cut around here. Okay, so we just split this in half basically. It's as simple as that for these pieces, and then D, and I'm going to drag the box around here to drop those. Okay, let's go into the UV view and make sure this is flat, and then we can actually copy it over to the other pieces. So let's flatten you out. Okay, and you see that flattens out actually quite nicely. Alright, and then we just need to flatten these two things here, and that's that done. That's that one whole piece. You might want to scale it up and flatten it a bit, but for me that's more than good enough. Alright, so there we are. Let's try and copy it on the other bits. So 3D, let's copy UV, find a piece here, equals, and it found 4 of them. Well, that's a pretty good start. Now we need to tell it to just match the others, and we don't care if there's a little error in the UV. So let's copy UVs. Actually, it's the other way around. Go away, you. I'm going to press enter to just clear that. Copy UVs, this one to say this one, and enter. Okay, that really didn't like that. That really threw a large conniption with that. And the texturing in my viewport has kind of disappeared on me. So what I'm going to do, folks, as I think this has just thrown a bit of a wobbler when I did that, is just save out quickly. So let's save bedside table UV out. And I'm just going to close the program and I'll be back in a second. Okay, welcome back, and you'll see I managed to save most of it, but I'm going to have to do this again. So let's just go to edit, copy UVs, copy, equals, and spacebar. Now, as I was saying, you can sometimes force these to match, but as I said before, it can also go hideously wrong. So let's give this one more try. Let's try copying this one to this one and just pushing spacebar, and that actually worked. So let's see if we can get away with that again. This one to this one. Yeah, that worked. So it looks like we might get away with it now. Sometimes it will just throw a major wobbly on you. And what happens then for me personally is my viewport goes a bit skew width, so I just need to close and reopen the program. Luckily enough, it doesn't actually crash, so you can always save. So, you know, don't be worried about experimenting with that. But it is a bit of a pain. So let's get this one and see if we can match them. Yes, we can. So just one left now, I think. And let's come round here. And let's get a view we can see. Copy UV, this one. No, I don't want that one. And actually I'm going to press enter to clear that. Copy UV, this one, and this one. There we go. Perfect. Now, you can see some of them got some stretching and some of them got some ever so slight pinching. And in fact, we're missing one. I thought I'd got them all, but alas. There we go. Perfect. Alright, so now what we can do is, now the whole handle has been UV'd, we can come in here and we can find all those little tiny bits. There we go. We'll unlock them because they're all locked at the moment, so press L and right mouse drag button around them and that'll take the lock off. Okay, now because these weren't all perfectly the same, what I can do is come in and just flatten them out a little bit each individually. You see that one was a bit shorter, so you know, copying the UVs onto objects that aren't identical, it's definitely possible, but you might need to come in and do a bit of cleanup. Not such a big job. There you go, and that got rid of all that blue that was kind of hanging around in there. So there you go, one fairly complicated handle UV'd in no time flat, and let's see what we've got left. At the moment, the only thing we've got left is pretty much the inside of here, which I'll actually do properly, and then all we've got left is what's inside the cabinet. So depending on how fastidious you are, you might want to do that, or just kind of quickly segment it out and shrink it down as we did with the room. But let's go ahead and get it done. So edit a view, let's see what we got left. I'm going to press home. Alright, so we got this left, and that should just flatten out actually. So D to drop it, UV view, and hang on a second folks. Seems like the viewport's gone a bit haywire. Okay, I just came back, so apologies, not quite sure what happened there. But let's flatten this out. So spacebar F, see how it does. And this is the back of the cabinet. This would be, let's have a look here. This would be this portion underneath here. So you are going to be able to see it from certain angles. So it is worth taking a bit more time on it. So back to UV. Where are we? Hello, UV. There we go. Sorry, I'm temporarily struck blind apparently. And let's cut this out actually, because there is a table leg in the way of where this seam would be, and this will allow us to get this a little bit flatter. That kind of flattened out a bit more. Let's try these pieces. They flattened out quite a bit more. Okay, let's just straighten them up. And you can see how tiny that handle really was when we put it in comparison with another piece. And I'm just continuously holding F over this. In fact, I'll probably go either spacebar and F or Shift and B to scale up and flatten. And just give that a second to kind of flatten out. Okay, you might want to give it a bit longer, but for me, I'll show you where it is on the model. It's this portion of the model. So unless I've got a back shot of this, it's not important. And even with that stretching, it's really not that noticeable, which is good, which is exactly what we're looking for. So we're looking for, no seams in obvious places. And if we look at what we've got here, we've got one seam that runs along the top, but it's kind of hidden in a cutout point. We've got another seam here, which is never going to be noticed unless you render from upwards. And we've got a few seams in these legs here, but the seam is at the back. So, from the front, you'd have to come all the way around here to the back to see it. We've got, oh no, we don't. We connected this, so we've no seam. So basically, we're looking pretty seamless as far as painting this would go. There's a seam here, but again, how noticeable is that going to be? So that's what you're looking for. You're looking for either putting up with a little bit of stretching, like as in here, to get rid of the seam, or you're looking at an extra seam. And again, when I say a little bit of stretching, I mean fairly much a little bit of stretching. Okay, let's go back to the editor and see what we've got left to do. Now, one of these is the bottom of the table, so it should be this. And this we actually care about because, in a shot, the bottom of the table probably will be visible at a few angles. So I'm going to give that the benefit of the doubt and leave that full size. So let's go to editor and drop the bottom of the table in. And you can see it's the bottom of the table. Let's just drop that in there, and UV, let's just flatten this. Okay, so that's the bottom of the table. Now everything here, I'm going to press L and middle mouse drag right mouse drag a box around all these table legs that were locked because they were duplications. And all of this looks pretty good. I'm actually going to do the same here, L and drag a box around those because they were also duplications. Alright, and now I'm going to give this a quick pack. So just literally a quick pack. I don't want rotate on, I want fast, just pack all, just getting it all sort of out of the way. And what packing ratio do we get? 59.6%. Alright, we can deal with that. Let's go back into the UV view, the editor view. Now all of this stuff, all of it, is all inside the cupboard. So, I don't really care about it. You could use the same techniques we've been using to chop it all back up again. But, for me, I'm just going to use the segment. So, segment, I'm going to put this to R, which will segment radial pieces. And I'm just going to hit segment mark polys. I don't have any mark polys. So, G, drag a box round, segment mark polys. Okay, into the UV view. And there you go. So, it's segmented and stacked those up quite nicely. Let's select them all and shrink them, because again, all the inside. So what is the point of assigning a lot of texture space to it? Now, it's fairly nicely UV'd with that segment command, so you could come in and kind of stitch it back together and make it a lot nicer. For me though, whoops, I don't want that. I want to move this box out of the way. Would you? Okay, I'm going to have to move this piece out of the box, bloody thing. And here we go. There, done. Okay. And then the box will disappear when it's no longer got anything in it. So, we've got the UV map here, and if I was doing a scene where I was going to pull the draw out, then obviously I could go back in and scale that inside draw portion up to full size. But for right now, much more important to maximize the texture space we can see and we can use. So let's take a look at the pack. UV view, of course. And this is not bad. Again, you can normally get it better by hand. Let's just give it a quick pack all. And how did that do? For some reason I can't see that. 62%, so not wonderfully. In fact, let's go back to our previous pack, put this on best and pack all. I'll let you play around with this, whether you want to turn the rotate on again, is highly dependent on you. And what do we get here? 65%, but I actually preferred the layout before. So I'm going to call this one a day, and I thank you for watching. I hope this has given you some insight into Headus UVLayout. So, we've done some fairly rounded organic shapes, we've done some fairly hard surface stuff, we've kind of discussed, I hope, the when and wheres and why fors of where you're going to put your seams versus where you're going to allow your stretching. We've looked at a different scaling for UVs and why you would have smaller parts as opposed to bigger parts. And we've got some very flat, very nice UV maps that can now be painted over in Photoshop, Mari, Nuke, not Nuke, ZBrush, sorry, whatever you'd like. So if you're a Maya user, there'll be an extra part where we discuss getting the UV map transfers over in Maya. You can just save here and save the OBJ and import that into your 3D program. That works perfectly fine. Or you can transfer the UV maps. Now if you're coming from Cinema 4D or Lightwave, you're just going to have to look up how to transfer UV maps from one object to the other. If you're working with Maya, I'll be back in a second to show you how to do that. Alright, so once again, thank you for sticking with me. There's been a couple of very long parts, and I hope this has been of some service to you. If you need any help, you can catch me on the forum. My name's Dave. Thanks again. Hi, welcome back. In the last part we finished off with the UV here of our little chest. I just flick that on there and you can see there we got a really nice UV. Now I went ahead and optimized mine a little bit, so let's have a look at it. And I just basically straightened up a few bits using the R command to make them proper rectangles. I chopped those side bits up a bit. I put some extra seams in just so I could get a slightly tighter pack. I also selected all my small pieces for the handle and the bottom of the legs and whatnot, and I just hit new box like we've done before, and that organizes them all neatly so I can drag them all around as one thing. So this is not particularly optimized UV, it's about 70% fill ratio. So again, if you're a fan of the old jigsaw puzzle, you can come along now and arrange this by hand. So I really wanted to talk now about getting this into Maya. So if I just save this out from Headus UVLayout, so I say bedside table for UV object, and I'll just hit save, give it a second or two, and save done. So I'll pop open Maya, and you can see this is the original object for that particular scene, should I say. And at the moment it's got an auto UV from Maya on it, which is going to be no good at all. So let's import our bedside table that we just UV'd. So I think I have this here in scenes, bedside table for UV layout, that will be it. And that's complaining because the OBJ came in as one object, which Maya in its wisdom separates out into selection sets here. We don't need that, so we'll just get rid of those. There we go. And here's the one I UV'd. So if I put a material on this, you can see I've already got this sort of checkered material in the scene. So let's throw that on there, see what it looks like. Alright, so you can tell, got a nice UV here. It's all nice and squared out, nice square boxes all over the place. Exactly what we want to see. And if we take a look in the UV texture editor, okay, there it is. I'll just dim this image. So there's our UV. Now the problem is that this is on an OBJ, which a lot of the time isn't a problem at all. But say you had some reason for wanting to take this and get it on your existing model, you can transfer the UVs and then delete the OBJ that you imported. So this model here, it's in lots of different pieces. So I'm going to gather it all up, hit mesh, combine. Okay, and now I should quite literally be able to take this UV set and put it onto this UV set. Except let me just undo that combine. because this one looks like it's been smoothed. So obviously at some point I've come in there and smoothed it. So let me just take that off. And when I combine this, I'll want it to be unsmoothed. So I guess I could just select the whole thing and unsmooth it. Basically, I want it to be the same as this one. Okay, so now they're the same object. You'll have to excuse me. I obviously was tweaking this between doing the UV tutorial and doing this tutorial. So let's just go Mesh, Combine. Now, a lot of the time we'll be able to get away with transferring this whole UV set all at once. So select this object and then select this one. The order of selection is important here, folks, because the one you first select will become the source, and this one will become the destination. So let's have a look at this a second. Actually, I think I've led you a bit down the garden path there. This one was actually smooth before I transferred it. Sorry about that. Okay, once again, Mesh, Combine. Going senile in my old age, excuse me. Right, there we go. So select this one, Mesh, Transfer Attributes. We want to transfer it as a component. We want to, in fact, I'll reset this so you have the same settings as me. We want to transfer the current UV set. We want to transfer as component, and we just want to hit transfer. Okay, so let's put the UV material on this and see if it did. And indeed it did. So sometimes you'll have to transfer individually, which is no problem if we separate this out. So separate and separate this out. Separate. You can select these individually, so one at a time, and then just go Mesh, Transfer Component, Transfer Attributes, sorry. There you go. So that would have transferred it. In fact, if I put a different UV map on this, so I'll just put a auto UV map, you can see that transfer, automatic mapping. There we go. Let's go back to object mode. Alright, now this one, okay, so that decided not to auto map that. There we go, and let me have a look at this in the UV texture editor. Okay, so that has definitely not mapped that. Right, and this is one of the things I wanted to go over for you. At the moment, because we have the transfer of attributes between these two things, until I delete the history on this, I won't be able to change anything. And that goes for this. If I delete this now, you'll see that UV radically changes. That's because these two are linked together. So that illustrates the point quite succinctly. I can't edit the UV map on the destination object while it still has history on it. So if I just delete the history on this, edit, delete by type, history, and I'll just put the material back on. Okay, you can see we've still got the same UV map, but now I'll be able to come in and change it. So let's just say I'll just put an automatic map on this. You can see that that's made a complete dog's breakfast of it. You know, you wouldn't want to paint this, I'll show you. You know, you would not want to be taking that into Photoshop for painting, really. And if we compare that to our UV, so let's just go to object mode and UV texture editor. Okay, there's our UV, nice and easy to paint in Photoshop, or Mari, or ZBrush, or whatever your poison is. So now I can select these one at a time and just go Mesh, Transfer Attributes, and there you go. You'll see that works with the objects combined and also the objects singular. So let me just break the connection between those two by deleting the history. Okay, and that works for pretty much anything you bring in. So let's import our bed. And bed for UV layout object. There we go. So I can take this and assign a checkered material to it. There we go. So you can see, you know, these checkers are a lot bigger than these because, again, we are not wasting that UV space by giving a high resolution texture to something we're not going to see. So again, I just take this source, destination, mesh, transfer attributes. And now I'll put the checkered material on this, and you'll see they have exactly the same attributes. Now I'll delete the history on this, history, and now I can delete the OBJ. Same with this. Make sure we've deleted all the history on this, and then I can take this OBJ that we brought in and back. So the UV is now on your original Maya object. Nothing wrong with just importing the OBJ and using that if that's what you need, but that's a quick way just to transfer the UVs around. So I hope you found this tutorial informative, and if you like the look of our room here, we've got the tutorial online for how that was made. So I'm going to be back shortly with a tutorial on V-Ray and Mental Ray and Maxwell. So I hope to get that online within the next couple of weeks. Thank you very much for watching.